with the greatest number of personal dynamics. Again, the greatest decisions are the ones that accord with the greatest number of personal dynamics. As I've spoken about this before, it's that idea of the personal, intellectual, emotional, physical, spiritual, all of these different domains. We have to consult each area to ensure that when we make a decision, it will be the best resolution for each of these different areas. We need to explore these ramifications and go through that mental processing before we actually make that decision. Now, the best decisions are the ones that have a component of emotion and intellect. If they're too far weighted on one side, then you're going to have something like a particular political party that make some pretty gruesome decisions that ultimately don't seem that intellectually balanced. Now, to make this more concrete for you, it's this idea of there's this economic truth that ought to be something that we think about. It's the idea that we live in an economic system, and we need to be certain that the particular career path that we move towards is ultimately going to yield some kind of financial value or stability for us, or maybe a component of both of those. Now that's looking at it intellectually. Now if we only look at it in the emotionalized sense, that is to say, the particular career that we choose, if it's just something we completely love, but it's not making us any money, well, how are we going to survive in this economic system? So in some sense, there has to be a balance of emotion and intellect. The intellect is realizing this economic truth that to survive, we need to make money. And then the balance is, I don't want to do something that I don't love to do. So you got to find that balance. Now, I went through a personal revelation where I weighed my options, and I want to share that with you. So currently, I am studying computer information technology for an undergraduate degree at Cal State University Northridge. And I had a passion when I was younger for studying computers and toying with them and learning how to program and doing types of video editing, fixing computers, building computers. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to move in towards that direction. Now, as I started to get deeper into the nature of computer technology, I realized that it's pretty invested. And there's a lot of technical jargon, and there's a lot of programming classes, and there's a lot of mathematical concepts. Now, that's not to say that I don't like these things, but it just necessarily wasn't the thing that I thought it was going to be. However, I'm so far into it that it only makes sense that I will continue with it, because I only have about 1 year till I graduate with it. Now, at some point along the road, it dawned on me that I want to study literature, because literature is where human motivation lies. If you really want to learn about psychology, study how those motivations arise. Study the particular social clues and personal cues that end up arising in that individual, and that you can see their thought process as you read these texts or you watch different films which personify different pieces of literature. I ultimately realized that this is the direction I want to move in. So that's when it hit me. I want to teach. I want to have that intellectual intercourse, that intellectual exchange with other people where I can constantly get that intellectual stimulation. So this is what I decided to do. I decided that once I graduate, I'm going to work in the field, save up money, pursue my master's degree, while being able to pay off the tuition fees with the money I make from from working in the technology field, and then ultimately I can move to teaching. Now, as a side note, I believe that you always have to have contingency plans, and especially in the career sense, because if you don't want to fail, you need to have a plan B. You need to have a plan C, which is why on the side, I also have my own personal training company. So I want that to expand, and who knows where that's going to go. I'm hoping it will evolve. So the thing is, as you can see in this whole scenario, is that I ultimately found this balance between emotion and intellect. So the ultimate underlying truth here is that you want to balance what you have to do with what you love. And in between is how to live. So that's that idea of the economic truth, and that's that personal example. Now, two other things I want to talk about, they're not necessarily related, but in the greater context, you can find the relationships, is the idea of your personal time. That is to say that when somebody, let's say you get a cookie, right? And this cookie is something that you've really been looking forward to. Or let's say it's your favorite food. What is your favorite food? You just got this food and you're looking forward to it. Say you had a long day and it was the highlight of that day. And then someone comes over to you, say a friend, and says, hey, can I have a piece of that? And then you're like, all right, you give them a piece. Let's just say a cookie for this instance. You give them a piece of that cookie. They're satisfied and they walk away. And then another friend comes over and says, hey, can I have a piece of that cookie? You're like, okay, and you give them a piece of that cookie. And then another person comes over and wants a piece of that cookie. Now, the thing is, where do you draw the line at which this is my cookie and this is something that I'm not going to share anymore? At what point do you bring forth your ethical structure of setting boundaries for people and not letting them take over your life? Now, this is ultimately a metaphor for establishing those boundaries with people, because in some sense, people oftentimes don't know what they do. And a lot of times they do know what they do. But what you need to do is you need to realize that you need to set the guidelines for how people treat you. And when they mistreat you, you need to push back. You need to not let them continually extract your truth, the truth of your beingness and your spirit and your love, and leaving you depleted. Now that's where this idea of energy versus truth comes in, because you might have certain relationships where they continually feed on your energy and they continually take your truth, but they give nothing back. There's no reciprocity of that symbiotic nature where that, you know, that feeling when you're talking with someone and it just seems to be going really well and you feel charged up? That's the type of feeling that you ideally want. But that doesn't mean that we get that in all relationships. So sometimes that means that we have to actively disconnect from those people who keep taking our truth and don't give us any energy or truth back. Now, this still relates in the context of balancing an emotion and intellect, because in this sense, with this concept, is that you realize intellectually that you're just exhausting your resources of emotion, but they're not getting anything back. So if you look at it from the intellectual exterior viewpoint, you realize that there's really not a lot of value in that particular friendship or that particular relationship. And with the cookie example, it's, of a similar nature. If they just keep expending all of your emotion and they leave you so taxed that you have nothing left for yourself at the end of the day, that doesn't seem to be the most pro-survival way to live. So now you can start to see how all of this relates, and you also understand that this is an action concept because you can immediately begin taking action. For example, that cookie or your favorite food. No, this is my cookie. Get your own cookie. And it's an awareness concept because it brings to mind this important distinction between energy and truth, and the fact that we live in an economic system, and in a certain sense we have to abide by the rules. Now, another way to just kind of crystallize this idea is like if you're living under someone's household, let's say you're with your parents and they have certain rules that you have to abide by, which is understandable because, they pay for the roof and it's their house, their rules. Now the thing is, if you don't like it, then move out. But it's still that general truth of like, okay, if you're living in it, you have to abide by the system, and we're living in this economic system, and you have to abide by the rules, you have to survive. So there's a lot of information that's coming at you right now, but highlighting these distinctions and these individual nuances between these different ideas and just bringing them forth will ultimately help you find your path. Thank you.